Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale Arctis video, where today we're going to be completing the game with Steel types only. Now, the Steel type is one of the best types in the game, with it having very many resistances and only a few weaknesses, and many Steel types have really high defense stats or are very bulky, so they are going to be surviving attacks very well. To contrast this, however, the Steel type is one of the worst offensive types in the game, only hitting Ice and Rock for super effective damage, and it's resisted by quite a few common types. Luckily, the Steel types in the game do obviously have access to other types of moves, so they won't be burdened by the Steel types' offensive drawbacks too much, so I do think that they are going to do very well. But with that being said, the first thing we need to do is spin the wheel. Now, the Pokemon that I think I'd want the most would probably either be Magnemite or Scizor, simply because they start off with pretty strong attacks. They can deal with most of the early game. And I get Steelix. Okay, Steelix isn't a terrible Pokemon, especially for this part in the game, but it isn't the greatest either. It has 75 HP, 85 attack, 200 defense, 50 special attack, 65 special defense, and 30 speed, and gets access to mostly rock and normal type moves. However, it does get Iron Tail, Crunch, and Earthquake, of course. So while it doesn't have the greatest move pool, 200 defense is nothing to scoff at, and 70 HP combined with that means that it's going to be surviving on the physical side extremely well, but its low speed and low special defense does leave it open to strong special attackers taking it down pretty easily. But I think overall it should be pretty good. So with that, we go ahead and move on to our Steelix in particular, who has a serious nature, which is unfortunately a neutral nature, but I guess I prefer that over something that would lower its special defense even further, or its speed. Steelix gets access to the Rockhead ability, which prevents recoil damage from all moves such as Double Edge, which could be useful, and according to Bulbapedia, it gets Tackle, Screech, and Bind by level 10. So with that, the first thing we need to do, of course, is pick up another Shadow Pokemon to then turn into another Steel type. And Steelix is actually the perfect Pokemon for the job. Because of its high defense stat, it can take on the Shadow Pokemon very well, and it doesn't really threaten to do that much damage to them with only having Tackle. So with that, we catch the Ladybug, and we get to spin the wheel again. Now, I am hoping for something a lot stronger because I want to get through the early game quickly, and, oh, looks like it might be Scizor. Unless it lands right on the edge of Pineco. Now, Pineco actually isn't all that bad a Pokemon, because it has 50 HP, 65 attack, 90 defense, 35 special attack, 35 special defense, and 15 speed, and when it evolves it has 75 HP, 90 attack, 140 defense, 60 special attack, 60 special defense, and 40 speed. So Pineco and Forretress are very solid Pokemon, getting a lot of normal moves as well as a couple grass type moves, dual screens, and the ever useful Explosion, in case I want to go that route. And it also has the fantastic Bug Steel typing, making it neutral or resistant to most everything except having a 4x weakness to fire, which is a big deal, especially considering I'm going to be running all Steel types, so fire is always going to be an issue. And the thing is between Forretress and Steelix, I think in this challenge specifically, Steelix is going to be better. It has a much higher defense stat and a bit more bulk. And while the dual screens would be very nice, having a Pokemon that is at least neutral to fire type attacks, I think is going to be much more helpful. So while I am going to use Pineco for now, I might eventually replace it later. Anyway, moving on to our Pineco in particular, it has a calm nature, raising its special defense but lowering its attack stat, which is quite unfortunate because using those explosions later would be less effective now. It has the sturdy ability, preventing one-hit KO moves from hitting, which isn't all that great, and according to Bulbapedia, it gets Tackle, Protect, and Self-Destruct by level 10. So it is at least going to be useful for exploding on things. Anyway, next thing I do is I pick up the Shadow Poochyena to spin the wheel once again. Right now I have two fantastic defensive walls, but I'd really like something to actually deal damage, and Scizor will do just that. Okay, nice. Scizor has 70 HP, 130 attack, 100 defense, 55 special attack, 80 special defense, and 65 speed, and gets access to mostly normal type moves. It does get Metal Claw for stab, And while that is an okay move, the most important thing it gets is Swords Dance, raising its attack by 2 stages, so it'll be able to make good use of that 130 base attack. So with that, we go ahead and move on to our Scizor in particular, who has a lonely nature, raising its attack but lowering its defense, which I think is honestly fine. If I can be hitting harder, I probably should. It gets access to the Swarm ability, which unfortunately, because it doesn't get any good bug type moves, doesn't really matter. At level 10, Scizor has Quick Attack, Leer, and Focus Energy. So with that, we get into the game, and I forgot to record it, but at level 11, Scizor gets Pursuit. And of course, 2 fully evolved Steel types make quick work of the old man's team. Now moving on to the Power Rangers, I decided to fight Blue today. I don't actually understand why. In hindsight, Purple I think would have been the better choice, because Steel type is immune to Poison type moves, which would have been very helpful. But anyway, let's go ahead and just start a little bit of rambling. If you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now the first thing I'd like to say is, why am I starting out with Steelix and Scizor, and not starting out with Forretress? And that's because I completely forgot about the Metal Coat item for some reason. I don't know why, but I just didn't think about it when I was starting up the challenge. So I had already done the entire thing with Steelix and Scizor and didn't really catch the mistake till much later in the game. So unfortunately, this is a bit of a scuffed challenge run, but had I started it normally, I'm not sure if the team would have changed too much, other than having a Scyther throughout most of the game rather than a Scizor, and maybe swapping out the Onix for Pineco just because it evolves quicker and is in a faster level group. But with that being said, that's kind of the reason this video took so long to actually get out, is because I just didn't want to release it. But also I put the time investment into it, so I can't exactly not release it. So with that, we go and move on. I pick up the Spheal, and because it's at level 17 or 18, I will be able to get a higher level Pokemon. And in this case, I'm really hoping for either Beldum or Magnemite, which I do in fact get Magnemite. So this should be very nice. Magnemite has 25 HP, 35 attack, 70 defense, 95 special attack, 55 special defense, and 45 speed. And when it evolves, it gets 50 HP, 60 attack, 95 defense, 120 special attack, 70 special defense, and 70 speed. And it gets access to mostly normal and electric type moves, which isn't great type variety, but the thing is that Magnemite is really the only special attacking Steel type in the game, not counting legendaries, which I'm not using this video if I forgot to say that. But Magnemite is going to be very useful because other than its weakness to ground, which it has a 4 times weakness to, it's just going to be very strong. So moving on to our Magnemite, it has a timid nature, raising its speed but lowering its attack, which is honestly a great nature for Magnemite. And you might notice it says level 14 up there. I end up fixing this right away. It gets access to the Magnet Pull ability that traps all Steel type foes from switching, which isn't all that useful in this game, but it doesn't really matter. And by level 17, it gets Thunder Shock, Metal Sound, Sonic Boom, and Supersonic. So with that, we continue through the Cypher base, pick up a Spinarak to get our next Pokemon, which I'm hoping to be something decent. Now preferably, I'd rather have Beldum or Aggron just so I can start leveling them up, which in this case I get Aggron, which is very nice. Unfortunately, because it's only starting at level 14, this is going to take a long while before I even get to Lairon. But with that being said, Aggron has 50 HP, 70 attack, 100 defense, 40 special attack, 40 special defense, and 30 speed. And when it evolves, it gets 60 HP, 90 attack, 140 defense, 50 special attack, 50 special defense, and 40 speed. And when it finally evolves into Aggron, it gets 70 HP, 110 attack, 180 defense, 60 special attack, 60 special defense, and 50 speed. Through level up, they get mostly normal and Steel type moves. However, the TM list is expansive, giving Aggron access to Ice Beam, Flamethrower, and Thunderbolt, as well as Water Pulse and Earthquake. Brick Break if I wanted fighting type coverage, but unfortunately most of these moves are locked behind getting to Aggron, whereas we are starting as a lowly Aggron, who has a lax nature, raising its defense but lowering its special defense, which isn't a great nature because it already is going to have such a high defense stat, but I guess more defense is good. Rockhead prevents recoil damage just as Steelix, and according to Wikipedia, it gets Metal Claw, Headbutt, Mudslap, and Harden by level 14. So with that, we continue through the Cypher Base, where we run into a Shadow Numble holding the Charcoal item, but more importantly, also holding the next Steel-type Pokemon, and I'm not exactly sure who I want next. We get Skarmory. Okay, well Skarmory is an interesting Pokemon because I've only heard really good stuff about it in the competitive scene, so let's go over it now. It has 65 HP, 80 attack, 140 defense, 40 special attack, 70 special defense, and 70 speed, and gets access to quite a few types. However, most of these are setup moves, and its level up learn set, its best moves are Air Cutter and Steel Wing. Now I could go out of my way to go get Aerial Ace, but that seems very out of the way. And while Hidden Power could be good, it's only got 80 attack, and if I happen to roll a special attacking type, it's going to do very, very little damage. So unfortunately, I'm not sure how well Skarmory is actually going to do, but Spikes could be an interesting strategy, maybe. So while Skarmory isn't the powerhouse I thought it might be, it is part flying type, which means that it's immune to all ground type moves, which will be very useful for later. So with that being said, Skarmory will be a part of the team. So with that, we go ahead and move on to our Skarmory in particular, which has a serious nature, which unfortunately is another neutral nature, so it's not going to really do much for us. It gets access to the Keen Eye ability, which prevents accuracy loss, which could come in handy because there are a few Pokemon that like to use Sand Attack, and by level 14 it gets Peck, Leer, Swift, and Sand Attack. So with that, we go back to the Cypher Base once again to go pick up our next Shadow Pokemon and the Black Glasses item. And this time it's going to be Beldum, which I do like Beldum, but unfortunately Beldum does have a lot of issues. For starters, Beldum only gets Takedown through level up. It does not get any TMs nor tutoring moves until it evolves into Mutang at level 20. Which might not sound that bad because it's already level 14, but because it's in the slow level up group and I'm already having to share experience throughout the entire team, it might actually take a while for it to get to that point. But anyway, it has 40 HP, 55 attack, 80 defense, 35 special attack, 60 special defense, and 30 speed. When it evolves, it gets 60 HP, 75 attack, 100 defense, 55 special attack, 80 special defense, and 50 speed. And when it finally becomes Metagross, it gets 80 HP, 135 attack, 130 defense, 95 special attack, 90 special defense, and 70 speed, making this our second special attacker that is at least decent. It gets access to mostly Psychic and Steel type moves, which is really nice. Psychic is incredibly strong by level 38, and Meteor Mash, if I get up to level 55, is incredibly strong as well. It also gets access to Earthquake, Shadow Ball, and Brick Break, which all could be very nice, as well as Dual Screens and Self-Destruct if I wanted to go that way. But with that, we go ahead and move on to our Beldum in particular, which has a naughty nature, raising its attack but lowering its special defense, which I'm kind of alright with. Having the higher attack is nice, and really the special defense is already decent enough. It's the Clear Body ability, which prevents my stats to be reduced at all, and it gets the move Takedown by level 15. So with that, we go ahead and move on, and we'll finally catch the final Shadow Pokemon to complete the Steel type set. So with that, the only one left on our list is Mawile, which has 50 HP, 85 attack, 85 defense, 55 special attack, 55 special defense, and 50 speed, and gets access to a lot of normal and dark type moves. However, it also does have a decent TM list as well, getting Ice Beam, Brick Break, and Flamethrower. Our Mawile in particular has a bold nature, raising its defense but lowering its attack, which definitely isn't a great nature for it. It gets access to the Hyper Cutter ability, which prevents attack reduction. It also could have had Intimidate. And according to Wikipedia, by level 15 it gets Astonish, Fake Tears, and Bite. Now unfortunately, because there are 8 Steel types, I do have to make the decision on who stays and unfortunately it's going to be Pineco and Mawile. So with that, we continue through the Cypher base until we run into Lovrena. She leads with a Love Disc and a Beautifly. I go for Quick Attack, which does quite a bit to Love Disc with a crit, but with both of them attacking Scizor, it gets nearly down to half health. I take down the Love Disc with Thunder Shock. Out comes Roselia. Go for Quick Attack, which doesn't really do that much to it. Roselia hits a Leech Seed on Scizor, and Thief really doesn't do that much damage. I miss Sonic Boom, and to get rid of the Leech Seed, I decide to swap Scizor for Skarmory, but Magnet Pull won't let me. Wait, I thought Magnet Pull only worked against the enemies. Okay, well this is very unfortunate. Okay, Roselia's taken down to a sliver, and back up to about a quarter. Quick Attack should finish it off though, and with a crit it's guaranteed. Then out comes Delcatty, her final Pokemon, but unfortunately it's going to get Leech Seed from both of my Pokemon. Thunder Shock really isn't doing that much damage, but luckily it does get paralyzed. Go for Thunder Shock and Quick Attack to take down Beautifly now, because I know these two are going to go down pretty soon. It's safer just to get rid of the other Pokemon first. And now I bring out Beldum, and that's because Beldum just needs a safe spot to start leveling up to level 20. And honestly, the Delcatty being paralyzed might allow it to live long enough. Okay, that did way more damage than I thought it would. And unfortunately, every time I attack with Beldum, it is going to be damaging itself, so I need to get it out of here now. Go for Peck, which isn't really doing that much damage at all. Go for a Rock Throw, swap into Aggron, and Rock Throw really doesn't do that much damage. Shadow Wave takes Aggron exactly to half health. Go for Metal Claw, which gets a lucky crit, and a Rock Throw finishes off Delcatty. Okay, so with that, I decide to make a small change, which is swapping Magnemite over to Sturdy, because I didn't realize that Magnet Pull worked against my own Pokemon, so over to Sturdy it is. And then, of course, you can't have a Pokemon XD Gale Darkness video without the obligatory Mirror Bee. Well, how are you doing today, Mirror Bee? Well, it's always good to see you, but today we actually need you because your Voltorb is holding the Magnet item, raising electric type damage by 10%. And at level 21, Magnemite gets Thunder Wave, which I decide to teach over Supersonic, and I pick up the Ralts here for the Twisted Spoon item to raise Psychic type damage by 10%, and then I go to the Real Gam Tower to go pick up my two favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect, and I also grab a Thunder TM while I'm here as well as teach Hidden Power to Skarmory, Scizor, and Magnemite. And Magnemite has Hidden Power Bug, Scizor has Hidden Power Poison, and Skarmory has Hidden Power Ground, which Ground is actually a pretty decent Hidden Power type, but unfortunately it's only 44 base power, so it's just kind of alright. And even though I'm not teaching it just yet, Beldum actually has Hidden Power Rock, which I believe is one of the best Hidden Power types you can get in the game, especially for a Pokemon that doesn't get Rock type moves, so we'll definitely be teaching that later down the line. But for now, we go ahead and pick up the Swinub for the Never Melt Ice item so that we can raise our Ice type damage by 10%, and then at level 20, Beldum finally evolves into Metang, which is certainly a much needed upgrade, which comes with a couple new moves in Confusion and Metal Claw. At level 26, Magnemite gets Spark, which I decide to teach over Thundershock, and then I go into the battle against Snaddle. He lives with a Lantern and a Quagsire, and I send out my very injured Scizor and half-health Metang. I go for Hidden Power into the Lantern, but it's not really doing that much damage and Scizor gets taken down. I decide to switch into Steelix. That way Lantern is going to have to go for Water Gun into it, but Quagsire actually decides to use Water Gun this turn instead of going for Rock Tomb like it normally would, taking it down in a single hit. So I bring out the Skarmory, Metang goes down, I bring out Aggron, and so far I haven't even defeated his two lead Pokemon, and I think that's just because my levels are extremely low for this point in the game. And that brings me to something that I haven't really thought about too much, and that is level up groups. Now currently half my team is in the slow level up group, those being Skarmory, Metang, and Aggron, which really leads to the issue of how to best distribute experience points. Should I ignore them more or less until later in the game, or should I prioritize leveling them up, that way they become stronger faster? I decide to choose the latter in this run, so after a humiliating defeat against Snaddle, I decide to go to Mount Battle at level 17. Aggron gets Iron Defense, which I go ahead and teach right away, And really, I just need to get the whole team up in experience because right now, every single one of them is really starting to fall behind. So at level 26, Scizor gets Metal Claw, and I think it's finally time to get back to it. Now I actually equal his levels, so this should be a much more equal fight. I go for Hidden Power Poison into the Lantern and Spark, which luckily gets Paralysis and takes it down to about a third of its health. Go for another Spark, taking it down with a crit. I'm not sure if that was necessary. Then out comes the Lunatone, which if I'm not able to take down in a single hit, will set up Shadow Sky. Unfortunately, it does survive the Metal Claw, and unless it also survives Quick Attack, it will set it up. I decide not to go for Quick Attack though, instead going for Hidden Power to finish it off. Out comes Cast Form, go for Spark into it, taking it down to nearly half. And while Rock Tomb really doesn't do that much damage to my team, the fact that they're already kind of slow and I'm kind of battling for speed control does make it a little bit more annoying. Weather Ball comes out, dealing a good bit of damage. Metal Claw finishes off the Cast Form, then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Tang. Magnemite survives on 2 HP, gets a crit with Spark, and unfortunately goes down to the Fruity Pebbles, but not before leaving its mark on the battle and putting us in a great advantageous position. Go for Quick Attack into the Quagsire, doing a decent amount of damage. Then a Thunder Punch and Rock Tomb into Scizor, taking it down to 9. Go for Screech to lower Quagsire's defense, that way the next Quick Attack should do much more damage. Metang goes down to the Fruity Pebbles, and all that's left is Quagsire. Now I decided to go for Metal Claw here, but it is resisted, so I'm not sure if I should have just gone for Quick Attack instead, though I'm not sure if it would have taken it down anyway. I'm left with 1 HP, and I decide to swap into Metang, not because I actually need to, it's just for the experience. Take Quagsire down, and finish off Snaddle. I then follow up with the Mayor to go pick up the EXP share. That will definitely help the Pokemon that are falling behind. I decide to teach Psychic to Metang, and at level 30, Magnemite evolves into Magneton. And honestly, I think part of my love for the Steel type actually stems from these two, because they just have so much personality in these games. Anyway, at level 29, Aggron gets Iron Tail, which I teach over Mudslap, and then I go into the battle against Gonzap. He leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf, and Nuzleaf is always going to go for Fake Out on the first turn, and I'm really hoping that the Electrode decides to attack where the Skarmory was, but instead of going for Spark, it decides to go for Sonic Boom into Magneton. When it seems to be continuing to do that, I go for Thunder Wave into Electrode to quarter its speed, primarily so that I can outspeed it with all my other Pokemon, and I go for Screech to lower its defense, that way another Pokemon can come in and finish it off. I decide to swap out a Magneton into Scizor because I really want Magneton for later in the fight. Luckily it just decides to go for Facade. I go for Hidden Power into it, nearly taking it down in a single hit. Hyper Beam really doesn't do that much damage, and Rock Throw finishes off Electrode. Then out comes Vileplume, which I really don't have any good moves for, so I decide to just go for Hidden Power, which doesn't really do that much damage to it. It sleeps Scizor, and then I go for Screech once again to lower its defense by 2 stages. I call the Scizor to wake it up, and then I swap into Skarmory, that way I can at least deal super effective damage to it with Peck. It goes for Giga Drain into Skarmory, which is 4 times resisted, but it gets a critical hit, dealing a lot more damage than I expected. I go for another Hidden Power and Peck to finish it off, and then out comes Whiscash. Now Whiscash is going to be a bit of a threat because it does have Spark, which always has that chance to paralyze my Pokemon. It also has Rock Tomb and Water Pulse, which definitely isn't that great, especially when I bring out Steelix, but I'm really hoping it just decides to go after Steelix anyway. It goes for Water Pulse, but into Scizor instead. Go for Screech to lower its defense, just as before. And then I go for another Quick Attack, taking it down to just a little under half. Goes for another Water Pulse, taking Scizor down to 1 HP. Steelix hits a pitifully weak Tackle. Go for another Quick Attack, finishing it off, which brings out his final Pokemon, which is Skarmory. Scizor goes down to Nuzleaf, and I bring out Magneton, and this was the main reason why I switched out Magneton in the first place, is because I really want to use Spark to take out Skarmory right away. And then all that's left is the Nuzleaf, which definitely can't take on my team. And I guess I should note that this is attempt number 2, because attempt number 1 was very close to a victory anyway. After defeating Gonzap, I get access to the move Shadow Ball, which I decide to teach the Metang right away over Scary Face, and then at level 32, Aggron finally evolves into Lairon, which is a decent Pokemon. In the Cypher Pyramid, I pick up the move Thunderbolt, and at level 29, Skarmory learns Air Cutter, which I think is just a better Swift, so I decide to teach it over that. But at level 32 it gets Steel Wing, which I decide to teach over Peck. And then at the top of the pyramid, I get the move Earthquake, which I'm going to teach the Metang right away, and then I go into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with a Lairon and a Celio, and I go for Thunderbolt into the Celio right away, taking it down. And then out comes Slowking. I go for Hidden Power Poison into it, which doesn't really do that much damage. I decide to switch into Skarmory now, because I know that an Earthquake's coming. Go for another Hidden Power, which still doesn't do that much damage. I avoid the Earthquake, and get taken down very low by the Slowking. Go for Air Cutter and Hidden Power, which Air Cutter does have a high chance for critical hits, but I'm not actually sure if that would have taken down Slowking anyway. But anyway, Slowking goes down, and then out comes Ursaring, and Lairon's probably going to go for another Earthquake this turn. I go for Steel Wing into it and Metal Claw. I get the attack boost, but that doesn't really matter because Scizor goes down to a crit Earthquake. And I decide to bring out Lairon, which might not actually be the best choice because Ursaring does have Brick Break, but it might be able to survive one of those. Anyway, I decide to go for Iron Defense and Steel Wing into the Lairon once again. Brick Break comes out, not doing that much to Skarmory. I get my defense raised by 2 stages, and then I do it again, raise it up to 4. Ursaring decides to use Slash into Lairon, which doesn't make much sense. Iron Tail, it lowers Skarmory's defense and takes it down to 7. I go for Metal Claw, and I decide to call Lairon. That way I can get my Iron Tail up to 100 or nearly 100% accuracy, and then I bring out Steelix. That way I can lower defense of his Pokemon. After an Earthquake goes around, I go for Screech into Lairon and Iron Tail, which unfortunately was not the correct move to do because it decided to protect this round. Double into it once again, go for Iron Tail to finish it off, then out comes the Shadow Primeape, which if this hits will have -2 defense. Okay, that's great. Go for another Screech into its position because it should go down to an Iron Tail, but unfortunately Steelix is finished off before it can get the job done. Then I bring out Metang. Iron Tail does finish off Primeape, but with a crit. Then out comes Hypno, his second Shadow Pokemon, and at this point I know Lairon's going to go down, so I decide to go for Earthquake, but unfortunately I didn't really consider that Hypno would be faster than me, so once Lairon goes down and I send out Magneton, it accidentally takes the Earthquake, taking it down in a single hit, and Metang goes down. Not a great first attempt, however the second attempt goes much better, leading to me actually winning with quite a few Pokemon left. So with Gorgon defeated, we go ahead and move on, and I'm going to pick up the Rain Dance TM and teach Double Edge to Scizor. I'll get to Rain Dance later, but for now, we need to go to the last area of the game. And while they are doing fairly well, the levels are really getting out of hand, because Scizor is only level 31 learning Slash at the start of the area. With that being said, they are still getting by just fine, so I go into the battle against Laverna. She leads with a Gardevoir and a Gorbis. I go for Thunderbolt into the Gorbis, taking it down immediately, then out comes Roselia. Gardevoir gets off and attract onto Scizor, and unfortunately I am immobilized by Love, which puts me in a pretty bad position because Thunderbolt isn't enough to take down Gardevoir without a crit, and Scizor is immobilized once again. Leech Seed is thrown onto Magneton, and Magneton really can't do that much to Roselia either. Luckily, the next turn I am able to finish off the Gardevoir, which allows Scizor to attack the Roselia, taking it down in a single hit. But then the Leech Seed is transferred over to Altaria, and unfortunately I really do want Magneton out to deal with the Farfetch'd, which it should go down to a single Thunderbolt, which it does, and then all that's left is the Shadow Altaria. Double Edge does decent damage to it. It heals up to about 3/4. Magneton survives a Shadow Rush before taking it down with a crit Thunderbolt. Now inside the volcano, at level 45, Metang evolves into Metagross. Finally at level 45. And then at the top of the volcano, I run into Snaddle, which he has his own Metang. Hello, other Metang. I go for Air Cutter and Earthquake, which Earthquake takes down Metang in a single hit, and does decent damage to Quagsire, though I would have preferred a one-shot. Then out comes Scizor, go for Air Cutter, not doing much damage at all. Luckily, it's just going for Waterfall instead. Go for Steel Wing and Earthquake once again, which Earthquake doesn't take down the Scizor, but does take it down to yellow. Out comes Solrock, which is going to take a Steel Wing, which actually doesn't do as much as I thought it would, and it hits a Silver Wind, dealing a decent chunk to Metagross. I go for Shadow Ball to take down the Solrock, and then I go for Steel Wing into the oncoming Cast Form, which doesn't do that much damage either. Steel Wing from Scizor really doesn't do that much to Skarmory. Go for Earthquake, which finishes off the Scizor and takes down the Cast Form, leaving me with just the Starmie. And while it does outspeed me, I'm almost certain that as long as it doesn't get a crit, I am in good shape. So it doesn't, only takes me down a half, and a Shadow Ball finishes it off. So with that, we beat Snaddle. And before we move on to Ardos, I decide to teach Protect to Lairon. And then he leads with a Swallow and an Alakazam. Now both of his Pokemon do outspeed me, so I do need to decide to take down one of them. And I think that Alakazam is the more threatening of the two. Go for Headbutt into it and Rock Throw, which only takes it down to half health, which is a bit surprising because of its low physical defense, but Swallow goes for Shadow Break, finishing off Lairon. And now I'm kind of on the back foot. I need to pick a Pokemon. I decide Skarmory might be the best, and it nearly gets taken down by a single Fire Punch, and Fruity Pebbles takes it down to 5 HP. I go for Air Cutter. Maybe I can make something out of it. Steelix goes down to a Shadow Break, and I'm starting to really feel the level difference now. Skarmory goes down to the Fire Punch. I bring out Metagross and Magneton, but unfortunately this isn't a great pairing because I can't Earthquake with Magneton around. So I go for Shadow Ball to hopefully take down the Alakazam, but Magneton goes down anyway. And so I have to bring out Scizor. Shadow Ball takes down the Alakazam, and then out comes his third Pokemon, Kingdra. Now, unfortunately, I've already burned through most of my team just to get to this point, and I don't think it's going to happen this time. Shadow Break is doing about half to Metagross. Luckily, a Hydro Pump miss. We go for Slash and Psychic, which Psychic takes down Swallow, but not before it sets up another Shadow Sky. Then out comes Heracross. Hydro Pump misses again, which is incredibly lucky because I swear that Kingdra hits just about every Hydro Pump it ever uses. Go for Psychic, which takes down the Heracross, bringing out Electabuzz, which is his second Shadow Pokemon. Kingdra finally hits another Hydro Pump, taking Scizor down in a single hit. And now it's all up to Metagross, which unfortunately cannot survive a Shadow Storm from Electabuzz. So I go into the battle once again. This time I'd lead Metagross and Lairon, and that's because I know Lairon actually survives a Fire Punch from Alakazam. I know it can at least survive the first round, as a lot of the other Pokemon probably can't. The other thing is that it sets up well into the second turn, and that's because it now has Protect, which means I can go for Earthquake and Protect to hopefully take down these next two Pokemon. Kingdra actually hangs on with quite a bit of HP left, but Alakazam does go down. Then out comes Heracross. Kingdra goes for Hydro Pump, which unfortunately it decided to go for Metagross, and with 9 HP left remaining, it goes down to Fruity Pebbles. But this does give me a free switch into something else. Skarmory does have 4 times effective damage against the Heracross, so I go for Air Cutter, which doesn't quite take down the Kingdra, but does finish off the Heracross with a critical hit. Then out comes Electabuzz once again, and I go for Headbutt to finish off Kingdra, bringing out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Snorlax. Now luckily, because Electabuzz and Snorlax are on the field at the same time, it should just be going for Shadow Mist to guarantee that the Snorlax is going to hit its Shadow Ends. Go for a Steel Wing and a Headbutt into it, hoping for a flinch, don't get it. Shadow Wind takes down Lairon, but Snorlax takes its own health down by half. I bring out Scizor, and at this point I really do need to start taking down the Electabuzz, because between the two of them, the Electabuzz is going to be much more dangerous once the Snorlax goes down. So I want to get rid of it as quick as possible. Hidden Power and Double Edge finish the job, and then all that's left is that Snorlax hitting it another Shadow Wind, taking down Skarmory in a single hit. And so I bring out Magneton, which should be enough to finish it off with a Thunderbolt. Okay, maybe it just needs a little more from Scizor. But with that, we beat Ardos on the second attempt. And our reward is Swords Dance on Scizor, which I decided to teach over Hidden Power. So with that, we go ahead and move on to Gorgon. He leads with an Ursaring and a Slowking. I go for Shadow Ball into the Slowking, hopefully taking it down in a single hit, which it does, and then out comes the Aggron. Now Aggron is going to take quite a bit of damage from Thunderbolt, not quite a one-shot though. Go for Metal Claw into the Ursaring, taking it down to half, and Thunderbolt into the Aggron. Unfortunately, decided to protect that turn. But now that I know the Aggron is open, I go for Psychic to finish it off. And then I go for Thunderbolt into the Walrein, which takes it down in a single hit with a crit. Then out goes Poliwrath, and both of my Pokemon are very well equipped to deal with it. Go for Psychic to take down the Ursaring. Out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Mr. Mime. Go for Thunderbolt into the Poliwrath, taking it down in a single hit. Is that another crit? Well, either way. Go for Shadow Ball. Shadow Storm comes out, which doesn't really do that much damage to either, and finishes off the Mr. Mime with a crit. Actually, there might have been a lot of crits that one, but I don't think it really mattered. Anyway, at level 42, Lairon finally evolves into Aggron, which is going to be very nice for these last couple fights. And I decided to teach Aggron Ice Beam because it's the only one on my team that can actually learn Ice Beam for the Dragon types on Eldis's team. Speaking of, he leads with a Manectric and a Ninjask, and I go for Protect on the first turn, and Manectric sets up Shadow Sky, go for Earthquake, taking it down in a single hit, and then out comes Salamence, his first Shadow Pokemon, and the first Dragon. So I decided at this point, because the Ninjask is going to be very annoying with Dig, I want to take it down as quick as possible because Ice Beam should be strong enough even off of a pretty weak special attack stat to take down Salamence. So it's not really a threat. Okay, well that only did half damage. Okay, never mind. Salamence might actually be a bit more of a threat than I thought. I go for Psychic into the Flygon and use Ice Beam to finish it off. And Aggron nearly goes down to the two of them, but luckily survives on 13 HP and can finish off the Salamence. Then out comes Marowak, which I also wanted Ice Beam for, but there's a good chance that Aggron won't even make it that far. So I go for Psychic into the Marowak, and luckily the Flygon does decide to attack Metagross, meaning that Aggron will be able to fire off that Ice Beam, taking down Flygon, which brings out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Lapras. Marowak hits Shadow End, taking Aggron down, but I think Aggron's already done a good enough job as is, and gives Magneton a perfect entry point to deal with the Lapras. Go for Psychic to finish off Marowak, and then all that's left is a Thunderbolt to take Lapras down to half health. Okay, well, I was hoping it'd do a bit more than that, but Magneton survives the Shadow Storm. And luckily, because the Shadow Sky is faded, even if Lapras were a 3-shot, it would have had to set up Shadow Sky that turn. So, Eldis is defeated, and I decide to go for something maybe a little experimental. Now, teaching Magneton Thunder makes a lot of sense. However, I'm going to also teach Thunder to Aggron over Ice Beam, and the reason for this is because Aggron is actually going to be the one setting up Rain Dance on my team. And that's because Aggron is about the only Pokemon that I think has enough bulk to actually set it up effectively, because Scizor is too slow and will get taken down in a single hit by most things. And I don't want Magneton to just be a liability out there on the field, trying to set up Rain Dance for itself. But before we get to that, we go into the battle against the big box legendary Lugia, and this is really the only chance for me to actually check the strategy to see if it's at least halfway decent. Now, Lugia does waste the first turn, just lowering my defense, but Aggron already has a huge defense stat, so it shouldn't really matter too much. Okay, well, Aggron actually took quite a bit of damage for that, and Thunders from both of them do finish off the big box legendary, so we move on to Greevil, and on the first turn, I set up Rain Dance, and neither of them actually touch me, so that's a great first turn. Accidentally misclick, I go for Thunderbolt instead of Thunder, but it doesn't matter because I'm taken down in a single Shadow Fire anyway. And Rhydon actually had Lightning Rod, which it has a 1 in 3 chance to have, which is just very unfortunate. Aggron goes down shortly after, then out comes Scizor, and I go for Psychic into the Rhydon, which doesn't even take it down in a single hit, which is very unfortunate. I go for Slash into Moltres and another Psychic to finish off the Rhydon, but unfortunately the Scizor goes down to a single Shadow Fire as well. Rhydon goes down, bringing out Executor, which Metagross does have the power to take down with Shadow Ball. Shadow Fire gets a crit, taking Skarmory down in a single hit. Then I bring out my final Pokemon, Steelix. Shadow Ball doesn't even take down Executor in a single hit. So, seeing as this attempt is doomed, I decided to just go for the KO on Executor. Maybe I can get a little bit more experience before I go down, which Executor is taken down. Out comes the Shadow Tauros. But at this point, there's nothing left to do. Shadow Fire hits and finishes off Metagross. Okay, well, I decided to teach Hidden Power to Metagross because it is Hidden Power Rock at 67 base power, which is incredibly powerful for Hidden Power. And I go into the battle once again for the second attempt. I decide to call with Aggron on the first turn. That way I might be able to land Iron Tails in the future, but Aggron actually goes down to a single Shadow Fire, which is very unfortunate. I bring out Magneton, and Hidden Power, of course, takes down the first legendary bird with ease. Out comes Exeggutor. Rhydon hits an extremely powerful Shadow End, and between the two of these, I really want to take down the Rhydon just because it's more of a threat. Then out comes Tauros. I go for Thunderbolt into it, which gets a crit, taking it down in a single hit, which is quite nice. Then out comes Articuno. And Exeggutor hits a Shadow End, taking Metagross down, which is the worst thing that could have happened. I bring out Scizor, and hopefully with the combined strength of the two, I'll be able to take down Articuno. Magneton actually does survive a Shadow Chill, but cannot survive the following Shadow End. I bring out Steelix, which doesn't really do much for me. Double Edge does almost nothing, and I think that's really the level difference coming into play. And I bring out my final Pokemon, Skarmory. I hit a Screech on Articuno, so it should be able to be taken down with this next attack, but Skarmory goes down, and Shadow Wind finishes off Steelix as well. Okay, well, after a few more attempts, I decide to go back to the tutor lady, and I'm going to teach Steelix Self-Destruct, because what I've found is that Steelix is actually pretty good at making it to the end. It just doesn't really have the damage output to do anything. So here we are, finally at attempt number 10. So I go for Protect with Magneton on the first turn, and then I go for Hidden Power to take down Moltres, which I really do want the Moltres to hit the protecting Pokemon, and the Rhydon hitting it as well is very nice. I decided to dump all my rare candies into Metagross, just so it can get more reliable KOs on its Pokemon. And because the Exeggutor is going for the 60% accurate Shadow End, I decide to paralyze it, just to add another layer of it not being able to attack. I go for Psychic into Tauros, which isn't quite a one-shot, but Thunderbolt does finish it off, bringing out his Articuno, which of course is a really strong threat. Exeggutor hits Shadow End, and some Fruity Pebbles come down, and I know that Magneton can survive a single Shadow Chill, so I should be able to take down Articuno with ease. Unless it gets an extremely high roll, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, it's just a bit unfortunate because Magneton was one of my best Pokemon to actually slow down Zapdos to make it more manageable, but I do still have most of my team left. Metagross survives the Shadow Bolt, takes it down very low. I hit a Screech on it, lowering its defense by 2 stages, so hopefully the rest of my team can finish it off. Go for Hidden Power, Metagross goes down, and I go for Self-Destruct. Aggron is the best Pokemon to take it because it is 4 times resistant to it. I finish off the Zapdos, and all that's left is the paralyzed Exeggutor, which with the power of Skarmory should be able to take it down. It hits a Shadow Storm, nearly taking down Aggron in a single hit and doing a huge amount of damage to Skarmory. And I go for Iron Tail because it's the only move I have right now, which luckily does hit and finishes it off. So with that, we've beat Greevil, but how well did the Steel types actually do? Well, they beat the game at a time of 14 hours, 34 minutes, and 24 seconds, with 14 feints throughout the game, which I'd say that the feints are pretty good considering 9 of those were from Greevil alone. However, I think that the Steel types do have some pretty big weaknesses. The first being is that the Steel type is a very defensive type. It does have a few Pokemon that are more offensive, but for the most part, the Pokemon are going to take attacks and not really deal much damage back, which can lead to a lot of fights taking a long time and lead to a lot of losses that could have been avoided. The second thing is, of course, the Pokemon are slow to level up. Half of my team was in the slow level up group, which meant that a lot of experience just had to be thrown over to them to actually keep them in line with the rest of the team being medium fast. Mawile is the only exception to this, being in the fast level up group, and while I would have liked to use it, its stats just don't really hold up compared to the rest of the Pokemon. The other thing is that there's not a lot of special attackers or Pokemon that have good special defense on the Steel types. So Magneton and Metagross are the only actual special attackers. I tried to run Thunder Aggron, which definitely did not work, but I felt could be an interesting idea. And the last thing is that while Steel type is one of the best types in the game, it is kind of balanced around the fact that its Pokemon are either a little frailer, having lower HP, or they just have noticeable weaknesses, like Aggron being 4 times weak to both fighting and ground. But the problem is that with the Shadow Pokemon, because they're always doing super effective damage, it negates the positives of the Steel typing quite a bit, which unfortunately leaves it in the C tier. But it has good company being right next to the duo of Onix and Steelix, which is a very unfortunate coincidence, but it's good to see them together. Anyway, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!